My name is Claire Nemes. I am a first-year PhD student here at the Appalachian Lab, and I love birds, and I love everything about birds. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I really started to pay attention to birds. And what did it was not actually seeing a real bird in the wild, but I found this book called Autumn Across America at a used bookstore. And this was written by a naturalist who just described this one species of bird called golden crowned kinglets so beautifully. And they're a small, very small songbird species that migrates through our area and spends the winter in Maryland. And they're just little specks of energy and movement, and they have these little tiny voices that ring out in the winter woods. And the way that he described them was so beautiful and so magical that I was really determined to see one. And I figured out that it was possible that I could see them just here in Maryland. And then I started learning about all of the other birds that we get in Maryland. And there's hundreds of species that you can possibly see. And it just took off. It was an incredible revelation that here they are right in front of you. Birds are I think of them as a gateway to nature, because they're literally everywhere across the entire planet, regardless of how urbanized your landscape is, regardless of, if you're in the middle of a desert or a jungle, birds are there. And they're generally very easy to observe, unlike a lot of other, vertebrate species. So they're really easy to connect with. And they do incredible things. They can fly. They can migrate in extraordinary distances. Even tiny little species like kinglets, and then songbirds that go even further, and they spend the winter in the tropics, and they'll breed in Canada. And those birds might only weigh 10 grams, like a few pennies. So they're an incredible. They're an incredible group of organisms, and unfortunately, we humans are making life a lot more difficult for them in a number of ways. So that's why I'm really interested in studying them and conserving bird populations, especially migratory birds. We are seeing population declines of a lot of species, and that's attributable to a number of different factors. Habitat loss and habitat fragmentation are major drivers of bird population losses in the US and elsewhere. But one of the sources of human-caused mortality of birds that we don't always think about is domestic cats. And domestic cats are estimated to kill several billion birds each year in the United States. So that's a greater source of mortality than collisions with windows or with wind turbines or other things that we might think about as killing birds. So what I'm really interested in looking at is the impact of domestic cats on specifically birds on their non-breeding grounds. So there have been a good number of studies that have investigated cat impacts and cat predation on birds in the US and Canada, even though there's a lot that we still don't know about that. But there have been way fewer studies conducted on the overwintering grounds, which is where a lot of migratory species spend the majority of their year. So you might have this really short, brief breeding season where birds are in the United States maybe for 3 months, but then they undertake these, long distance migrations, and they might spend their winter in Central or South America or the Caribbean, and perhaps they're being exposed to cats there as well. So really what I'm interested in determining is, are there cats in these locations where birds are spending the winter? And if so, what kind of impact might they be having on ultimately on bird populations? So I will be traveling to urban areas in the neotropics in order to attempt to estimate cat relative abundance or density at different levels of urbanization in these areas. And I'm going to do that by conducting distance sampling for cats, basically walking transects and determining how many cats I see, recording their locations, recording their identities, and also putting out arrays of camera traps. So we have game cameras that we can use to remotely detect cats, even if as is the case with a lot of cats that are roaming around outdoors. They might not be visible to humans because cats are primarily nocturnal. So the cats that I don't see on surveys, I might still be able to pick up with game cameras. And overall, these techniques will allow me to estimate relative abundance or relative density of cats at different levels of urbanization. And to at least give us an idea of where cats are, some idea of what their population size or densities are in different areas, and from that to try and determine whether they are likely to be impacting bird populations in these areas. So I will also be conducting, with the assistance of local students, surveys for birds in these areas, and hopefully getting a better picture of just what's going on in these locations. There's very little that's known about cat impacts on birds in the neotropics, but you know, they might have the potential to be negatively influencing bird populations. They might not. We just don't know. So we need this basic information on, are they there? What are some estimates of their relative abundance? And then we can determine whether we need to think about how to manage them, whether they're likely to be causing impacts to birds and other wildlife species of interest. Well, first of all, like any research project, this one does have a number of expenses associated with it. And without funding, I wouldn't be able to travel to these areas, to hire a local student as a technician, to investigate these questions that are really, I think, important for us to understand just what's going on with interactions between cats and birds in the neotropics. We just don't have a lot of information. So this research is really important to to further our understanding of these dynamics and what sort of impacts that cats might be having on birds in these locations, and then ultimately how we can think about solving those issues and potentially really having a direct benefit to birds, both migratory and resident bird species. On a more personal level, this is the first field season of research for my PhD, and without funding, I can't do that. So I'm really excited to be starting a PhD and to really dive into this process. And I'm really excited about this research. So any amount that you can contribute towards helping me conduct this research and in my journey towards completing my dissertation would be a tremendous help. Thank you very much.